Scattered terrain is a great addition to any D&D campaign. It can provide shelter during battles and is great for building an immersive playing field for your games. It can also be used to help mark out zones and paths. I decided to make some easy scattered terrain for my next Dungeons and Dragons session using crafting materials I had lying around. For the base for my crystals, I used balls of Sculptamold that I had left over from other projects. Sculptamold works great for rock textures and it's very lightweight. I used hot glue sticks for the crystals and a sharp Stanley knife blade to cut with. I used Modpodge glue mixed with black acrylic paint to coat my rocks in first. This strengthens them and it also helps stop any loose bits of Sculptamold from chipping off. You can get away with skipping this step for display pieces, but you won't want to miss this step for objects you'll be moving around a lot in game, as they are likely to chip and break over time. To finish the rocks, I took a light grey paint and did a heavy dry brush. Once dry, I then coated with a homemade oil wash. The next step was to create the crystal shards. This was actually a lot more awkward for me than it looked in the videos I watched online. I found the glue quite hard to cut and it took me ages. There was no plan to these cuts, I just sliced away until I was happy with the new shapes. Next up, I wanted to try a hack I saw over on Blackmagic Craft, and this was to use old sprues from my Warhammer minis to create crystals. Surprisingly, this was much easier to cut than the hot glue. My only issue here was I only really had thin pieces and they were a bit too small for the size crystals I wanted. The next step was to use a dab of hot glue to fix all the crystals onto the rock base. Do be careful not to use too much hot glue on this step as you will melt your crystals. I had loads of shavings left over from the making of the crystals, so I decided to scatter these at the base of some of my crystal rocks, and I really like how it turned out. The last step was to add a bit of colour. I painted the sprue crystals in purple with a pink dry brush to highlight those edges. For my hot glue crystals, I tried a new method. Instead of paint, I shaved some of my chalks and used the chalk dust to brush over the crystals as a kind of homemade pigment powder. The powder did not stick great to the glue stick, so I used a spray glue I found lying around to get it a bit more tacky. Make sure you don't use too much glue here, as like I did, then the powder starts to clump. I did also find that the brush marks started to show up, so I attempted another method by shaving the chalks directly over the crystals and then blowing off the excess. And that is it. Let's take a look at the final shots.